G'day guys, welcome back to Sunset City. It's been a couple of weeks since the last episode, so let's do a little bit of a recap. Where we last left off, Mike Bergency, CEO of the King Buns burger chain, is laying low with his family in his holiday house at Santa Julia. He's waiting for us to build his dream mansion home in the Sunset City Bay. Sorry big fella, but we're not going to be building it in today's episode. Nor are we going to be building anything to do with the Fab Soda Company, which is a storyline we started to flesh out in the last episode. I would though, however, like to add in a couple of little bits of storyline detail that was suggested from you guys. For starters, we're trying to figure out how the name Booster fits in with the storyline of Fab Soda, and I really like the idea that Fabio Booster was in fact the creator and founder of the company, and the name Fab of course originates from his first name. Now, I really love this idea and I would love to know more about Fabio Booster. One thing though we do know is that Fabio Booster will do anything for Fab Soda. In fact, he will go to great lengths to find the new and most innovative flavors out there. What new flavor comes from the swampy marshlands of Sunset City? Well, you guys let me know. I reckon this might make a great billboard down the track, or I think it might make for some controversies potentially down the track as well. There's still so much more to build for Fab Soda, and I think we're only just scratching the surface. We are though not going to be building any more for Fab Soda today. And I was meant to build a lot of things in today's episode. However, I completely overcomplicated, completely overthought, and spent a ridiculous amount of time building a train station. And yes, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, but it's miles away from what I had planned and leaves more questions than I honestly have answers for. Okay, so in my defense, building this train station was always going to be complicated, and hopefully by the end of this episode, you're going to realize all the reasons why. In terms of the development of the city, it's about time we built a train station. We probably should have built one a while ago. But I'm also building one to solve a couple of problems. We have a really bad traffic situation going on in Sunset City at the moment. Pretty much the only way in and out of the city is to drive, and this is becoming a bit of a headache. Now obviously public transport is definitely going to help this situation, but it's also a road and highway situation. All of these things kind of link together. The central station is going to be the catalyst of all this. It's going to impact the road layout. It's going to really kickstart the public transport within the city, the metro line, the bus line, all of that. Unfortunately, it actually just doesn't solve any of those problems. You'll soon find out. The first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to change a lot of the road layout around this area. When I say a lot of it, I mean all of it. We are still rocking a lot of the old roads that I was using when I first designed the city, which were not really reflective of how Miami or even just America in general usually looks. This is a little bit risky as I am deleting huge amounts of people from the city, basically evicting a bunch of residents, more so evicting a lot of commercial and offices, so it's a little bit dangerous work. I've only got about $500,000 to play with too, so I'm keeping the game on pause until I start zoning out and redistributing a little bit of that income. I still want my roads to be interesting, and a grid layout can be a little bit boring, but I do think that there are some interesting areas in Miami that I would like to take inspiration from. For instance, there is this diagonal road that goes down this area that just a little bit north of Miami downtown, which I think is going to be interesting. I'm going to be including something like that. There's also some other bits of interesting wiggly roads and roads that get cut off from the train line and other little spots that I'll be adding into this. And because our city is far more scaled down, it does also mean that these areas are going to be more concentrated. So we are going to have fairly interesting road layouts, but they're just going to make a little bit more sense, and I think they will make sense in terms of the development of the city, the way that suburbs are planned, the way that roads naturally go just because of the way that the landscape is like, with the influences of the bay or influences from other natural aspects. I think that's just going to make a little bit more sense. And apart from relocating a couple of important buildings, changing the roads doesn't really change too much of the detailed areas that we've already built. With the road layouts now established, it was now time to start placing down the train station. And the thing is, I actually had a pretty good idea of the station I was going to use, or at least I had two stations in mind. I placed the two down side by side just to get a bit of an idea of which one was going to be the best fit. I needed something fairly large with a couple of different platforms, and I also wanted something with a bypass line because there was the industrial train line with all the industry that was further beyond the city, so I needed something to bypass the actual station. And looking at the two, I soon realized that the largest train station of the two was going to be the best fit. And even this being the best fit, it was still a fairly large station, and I needed to make it work within the context of the city, shuffling around a couple of roads, making sure that there was a main access road off the main road, so there wasn't impacting the traffic that was traveling on that main road, which was already going to be fairly busy as it is. There was also the issue of the overpass on the left-hand side of the station that was going to be not giving a huge amount of clearance for the rail to go underneath. But despite these problems, I was finding some pretty simple solutions to it all, and I was feeling pretty confident with the way that it was starting to look. In saying that though, this is in fact not the station that we end up going with. This one was actually an absolute dud, and I'll explain why. The inspiration for this station has been coming from Miami Central. This is a station that is in a pretty similar location to the one that I'm building. Of course, it looks quite different, but I did want to include some sort of connection to the metro line. Also wanted to include some sort of connection to the people mover that I have in Sunset City. And I just wanted to include just bits and pieces, just ideas. I didn't want to copy any of the layouts, and I didn't really want to copy any of the design of Miami Central because, well, as you can probably imagine, this wasn't in fact built before the 1980s, this was built in 2018. And if I was going to be taking inspiration and ideas from something that has great connection to the metro line and great connection to the people mover, you know, a little bit of a transport hub, then I need to try and imagine what something like that was going to look like if it was built prior to the 1980s and was all connected up in some sort of transport hub, which is what I was trying to do. But as you can see, I was absolutely struggling with. So what I'm trying to do here is I've converted the whole station into a procedural object, which means that I can change some of the vertices and connect up different parts of other stations. As you can see, I have a metro station here, and I figured, well, maybe I could just drag this over to this station so that we can connect the two together, and it can be a bit of a transport hub with this walkway connecting the two together. And to be honest, I was feeling pretty confident in the whole process of this. I felt like procedural objects was going to be the real game changer here. Just moving some of these nodes and changing where some of these vertices sat meant that we could just tailor make this transport hub so that we had this beautiful connection between all three modes of public transport in this area. Because we now turn this building into a procedural object, the game no longer sees it as a functioning train station. So in order to make it work, I'm going through and finding the station network that I want, the ones that match up to the actual train line that I've created here, and I'm just dragging it out just so that it takes up the same amount of space as the platforms does, and that way this actually will work as a functioning train station. You just got to make sure that it's all connected and even connected up using the pedestrian pathways so that people can actually get to it. But more on that later, because for now we've got this problem at hand where we have the overpass that I was talking about completely blocking the way for this metro line, and I figured that the best course of action was to just make it even larger, make this overpass go over a couple of extra roads so that we had more space so that we could actually have that elevated metro line go completely underneath it, and having enough space so that we even had the people mover go between there. It is, of course, an ugly mess, but I did want to include something like this that was inspired by the real-life ugly mess of this area in Miami. I really love this intertwiningness of all these different networks. I think with a city that is so flat, we need a real play on elevation, and particularly when it is this elevation of different networks and bridges and these highways and metro lines and people mover, I think it's just like a really interesting spot. However, this is definitely not the spot for it, because as you can see, we already have something kind of like this on the left-hand side. So I made the better decision to demolish it, just get rid of it. Aesthetically, great decision. This looks way better. Practically though, in terms of traffic, terrible decision. So we're gonna have to fix that a little bit later on. But for now, great. Now you might be wondering, why don't you just make the metro line at ground level? Again, I kind of like the intertwiningness of different elevations and how they play on the city. I think it's, you know, in order to get something that is similar to the way it looks in Miami, I got to keep it elevated. This thing doesn't really go on the ground. Well, it does in a couple of spots, but definitely not near the downtown. So I want to keep it elevated. I want it to go at great heights because the metro line within Miami is actually kind of high in some areas. So I think that would be really cool to include something like that as well. So I had it in my mind that I was going to keep it elevated, which then just causes more dramas and just makes things a lot harder to manage. But that is also kind of the fun of creating something to a limitation or something to a like specific idea that you have in your head, you know, rather than just going, just be easier just to make it a ground level. No, I kind of want it to be elevated the whole way through, so I'd need to really try and make that work. Exhibit A, I really wanted the people mover to be connected to our transport hub. And as you can see, it kind of fits in pretty well into this area right out the front. It actually makes a lot of sense. You just kind of jump off the people mover, go straight onto the platform to catch a train or to jump on the metro line. You know, this whole area is really well connected up. But at what cost? Because this was bloody ugly. This just wasn't going to work. So despite all the effort that I had put into this design, I decided to start again, delete it all. It wasn't going to work. I realized that part of the problem was the monorail stations. They were just far too large. The ones in Miami are just these tiny little cute stations that have these center platforms, and they've just got a real look to them that I thought, you know what, stuff it. I could probably make one of them myself. So I found a corner of the map and started to play with some of the station networks, creating my own custom monorail station for Sunset City. And it was at this point that I realized that I had already gone down another rabbit hole and I hadn't even started to rebuild the station that I had started to do in the first place. This is of course half my problem when it comes to making videos in City Skylines. I start building something and then get distracted, and then all of a sudden I've built something that I hadn't even planned to build. So I decided to scrap that idea. We'll get back to it another stage. And to be honest, I still need to figure out how to make a one-way station network. If you have any ideas, let me know, because I need that before I start making them. But with all that said, as you can see, we are now rocking a brand new central station, a little bit more compact, a little prettier, but still, actually not the station I ended up choosing. Filling out a couple of blocks around this area with some low commercial and some historical buildings. In order to do the next part of this central station, I really need a bit of money. So, leaving the game running for quite a while, to earn that extra cash, I jump into the final, and I mean the final version of this station. Really liking the look of some of these historical buildings in this area now, I decided to go with a station that reflected a little bit more of the historical state of what this area is now turning into. There was in fact an original Miami Central that sat in the exact same spot as the new building that sits here. It was actually demolished back in 1963, and there's not a lot of reference pictures I can go off. I do know though that it wasn't as grand as the building that I ended up choosing, but I do really like the building that I chose just because it fits in really nicely with the rest of the architecture within the area. We've got a lot of Spanish colonial architecture, including this building that is in fact from Shanghai, but it actually fits in really nicely here. It's got a clock tower, and just actually fits in really well within this corner. This whole area is starting to look super nice, and there's not even any detail there. So we're gonna get to that a little later, but first I need to make sure that this station is even going to work, because that building there, that is their actual station, it's not functional. It's actually not a station. So I need to drag out the networks myself, just like the other platforms that I was trying to do before, and just connecting it up to the network that I have here, which is in fact a network that has 4 lines on there, and just connecting it straight to that means that we've got a pretty weird looking node. So I'm using here the adaptive networks mod. I don't think it's a mod, I actually think it's just a network, and this is by Revo, and this is a network which then allows you to use the traffic president mod to then connect up all your nodes and all your lines, and that way all the trains will just continue along that same line. I think this is also all part of the adaptive networks mod. I'm also using node controller to stretch out some of my nodes and just make sure they're all connected up really nicely. I'm also playing with a lot of different types of networks. I pretty much downloaded every single type of train network just to see which one was going to be the best. I will end up choosing the one that has the concrete sleepers, just because I believe that's the type that is used within Florida. Pretty much just going down to Street View and checking it out, seeing which one is used, and that's the best way to do it. So we'll end up choosing that one and changing all of my networks to that. And what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to see how long these trains are. I won't actually end up choosing these trains. I will end up choosing a bunch from Besquicklehausen, who has got just some excellent locomotives that are from this sort of era, the 1980s and prior, and a couple of extra ones as well. And I'm just sort of dragging out the networks just so I've got a little bit of extra space, and then dragging out a pedestrian pathway just to connect it up to the station. And I'll tell you what, this works honestly a little better than I expected. You can see people using the platforms and walking across. Obviously there's no detail, there's no platforms, there's nothing here, so they're just really connecting up to that platform, and that's about it. So with that working, I realized that all this is still a bit of a mess. So I go back and start dragging out some of these nodes using node controller, and as you can see, we've got a terminal station now instead of something that goes all the way through, and I've got a bypass line that is just one, well, it's one line, but it is a multi-directional one, so trains can go either way. So I feel like that's a little bit more realistic. Obviously it's gonna be better if I had 2 lines, but I don't expect there to be a huge amount of industrial traffic, and we're not gonna have any more passenger services out that way, at least I don't think so. And then just dragging out these platforms and using the adaptive network mod to change some of the details on these platforms, which is a mod I've actually never used before, but it works just so well. It's something I'm going to be using later on down the track. But I am also just making sure that the platforms align up to the doors, and it was at this point that I realized that there was a far better network that I could be using. It's actually this network that I've just dragged up there. It's way better connected up to the other network that I had on the right hand side, and it also means that I can have the bypass just bypassing this whole area much smoother. So after all that work, I decided to drag this one over instead. It was a little larger, and it was also a bit finicky to work with. For instance, the nodes where I was connecting up to the other network still had the wires overhead, even though I was disabling it with the adaptive networks mod. So it meant that I had to change the platform from ground level to elevated, and that seemed to get rid of it. But it did mean that it was now an elevated station, and it didn't really change too much of it, but it just meant that I had to kind of change the groundwork a little later on. But as you can see, the actual network was connecting up so beautifully, and spending quite a bit of time, a lot of time you're actually not seeing on camera. So I know this looks like it's coming together pretty quickly, but this is multiple days of work just trying to make sure that it all fits and connects and works really nicely together. And I don't think it's perfect. It's far from perfect, and I'm sure there's a lot of train guys out there watching this going, "Oh man, this is not how trains work." But it does look pretty decent, and I do love seeing the trains actually using the lines and using the networks rather than getting all bunched up and getting confused on those nodes. And check it out, these are our new trains. We have a bunch of Amtrak trains that are now occupying our lines, and as well as this one that I don't know the name of. Like I said, not a train guy, just a train appreciator. But with everything working well, it was now time to get back into the station and add in those finer details and actually make it look, well, at least halfway decent. Adding in benches and trash cans and palm trees and all those little bits of detail, including the shelters on top, really just bringing the place to life. But it is functionless unless I actually have the pedestrian pathways connecting to those platforms. I kept it all elevated because this is all a little bit above ground, and I also wanted to use the vanilla ones just because I wanted to see where the actual pathways were going, dropping it into the platforms, and then eventually when I knew that it was all functional and working as it should, then I could actually turn them into invisible pathways so that we were removing all those ugly elevated ones. With the pathways now invisible, it was now time to start creating a little bit of a walking platform using these ploppable pavements. At first I was a bit like, it's kind of annoying that I have to place down all this surface around here because everything is just slightly elevated. But it's honestly just creating that little bit of interest for this station and just creating just a little bit of elevation that I think is kind of necessary in a city that is so flat. I'm going to really need to have some tall buildings, some areas that have, just some slight elevation and a lot of networks, a lot of highways, and You know, lots of bits and pieces that kind of break that flatness. I think it's going to be really, really important, and I kind of like that this one is obviously not elevated because of the ground, but just elevated just because of a little bit of interest. I kind of like that. Now, I wish I could say the same about this next thing that I discovered about my station. I was really liking the way that it was starting to look, but something that I noticed was that, well, if people were entering into the building and then walking to their platform, they actually have to take a pretty long walk around. I mean, I don't really know how this happened, but the actual station itself is kind of on the wrong side. You would want the station to be closer to the section that people could actually just walk across, you know, so they could actually access their platform nice and easy. This is not nice and easy. This is kind of inconvenient. I could actually have an overpass that would fix that situation, but I feel like by design it's just flawed. Now, I know this is probably the part where you're going to think, oh, okay, so you're going to change it? No, I'm absolutely not going to change it. This is just how it is. I've spent far too long on this platform, on this station. It is just a poorly designed station. I have been to poorly designed stations before. This is another one of them. This is just another annoying one. But despite that setback, I decided to press on and just sort of weave that into the storyline somehow, or maybe get some suggestions from you guys. And I decided just to add in some fences, some parking, and just some little bushes here and there. I really wanted this to be nice and detailed. It's a real feature of the city, and the station itself was just looking super pretty, especially when you add in some ploppable pavement and just make it a nice color, and just a couple of extra buildings around. I mean, this area was truly, really coming together. Now I know all this is coming together really quickly, but all I can say is this is a bit of a process, and you're just gonna have to see all the finer details in the cinematics at the end. But I wanted to finish this off by just fixing a bit of that highway, because we did get rid of a pretty important connection to a main road and the highway. I really needed to replace it with something, and this was, I don't think this is gonna stay. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, I don't really know yet. There's a whole episode where we work on the highway. We actually really need to work on the highway. But I just wanted to create something just so there was a connection here, and of course this is going to be still very busy. I think this road and this connection's always going to be a super busy one, but I did want to have something, and I did want to provide some sort of connection, and just know that this is like the only way that people are getting into the downtown at this stage, and there's also an outside connection on the other side of this road, so it is about as busy as it gets, and I think it's probably going to be as busy as it gets. Wait, no, it's not. It's going to get so much worse. I haven't even built most of the city yet. It's going to get so much worse. So yeah, actually, we're going to have to come back here and work on a lot of stuff. But as you can see, I'm adding in some timed traffic lights, and I'm also connecting it up so that they are paired together. There's actually a whole system here. You know, it's not just this one intersection. There's actually a whole bunch of ramps and other roads and one-way roads that are all connected up, and it's not like at its finest state. You know, it's definitely a city that has implemented this as time has gone on, and to try and like incorporate it with the rest of the road network. You know, it's definitely not, they haven't just demolished it all and made a big ugly interchange. It's sort of interweaving with the infrastructure that's already there. But with the roads pretty much sorted, it was now time to get back into this area that was still pretty vacant, and I just wanted to fill it purely just because it's actually going to be something that's going to get redeveloped, because, well, remember that metro line? I still need to build it. And remember that monorail line? Well, we still need to create that station. And that whole transport hub. I need to figure out how I'm going to make that work with this current station. So if you guys got any ideas, please let me know, because we have to revisit all this and figure out how that connects up to our main central station now, which I think is going to actually work out a lot better, because it's sort of like they're trying to make it work with a much more historical station rather than building a brand new one. And I kind of like that. Something though I do not like. You know how we built this train station to solve the problem with all the incoming traffic? Well, that actually doesn't fix any of those problems, at least not yet, because a network station, which is the type of station that I created, doesn't accept any outside trains, so only local trains, which I actually don't have at the moment. There's no use for local train traffic. So until I build another local train station, which won't be for ages, this station is actually useless. So, thank you guys so much for watching today's episode of Sunset City. It is always very much greatly appreciated. And a big shout out to my beloved and treasured Patreons who allow me to make builds like this, even though sometimes useless, possible. Abraham Garcia, Jeremy 9, Nolalitus, Robin Regals, Vivid Swing, Pablo Hernandez, Raining Kelly, Bobby LA, Stephen Bodassa, Leo Horton, Chaffer Flex, Yizun Wang, and Dan Foster. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.